You then have to flee to Cincinnati, St. Louis, or Minnesota, grow a beard, and start a YouTube channel under an assumed name. I really hope no one from the AMA wants to write a novel. I have an existential crisis roughly 3 times a week. Well, I have way more existential crises than that, but the 3 I'm referring to are specific to this channel. So that's 3 YouTube-related crises per week, which is actually on the lower side for a creator. I and all of the other folks creating content around writing are faced with the same challenge: providing objective, often prescriptive advice about a topic which is inherently subjective. Attempting to provide logical, evidence-based analysis of a medium which is inherently designed to stimulate very illogical and mercurial parts of the reader's mind. It is easy to build and discuss rules around writing, things that you should and should not do. Active voice is better than passive voice. Make your dialogue distinct to the character. Don't use adverbs. Don't abuse the comma. That's all well and good, but these rules can very quickly fall apart under less than intensive scrutiny. The bestsellers list is filled with novels that violate one or more of the rules peddled on channels like mine. And there are countless authors who've made entire careers by ignoring the supposedly solid principles around writing solid fiction. This happens because the criteria of writing a great novel is not about checking a bunch of boxes around procedure and ensuring you follow a long list of specifications. A good novel needs to engage the reader and evoke emotional responses, and you can do this while breaking a lot of rules. Writing is not something like brain surgery, where there are established evidence-based guidelines and ways to do things that definitely 100% of the time work better than other ways. When you recklessly disregard the rules in brain surgery, people get hurt and you get hauled in front of a license review board where they discover that you never actually had a license to be performing brain surgery in the first place. You then have to flee to Cincinnati, St. Louis, or Minnesota, grow a beard, and start a YouTube channel under an assumed name. I really hope no one from the AMA wants to write a novel. So why am I still here making these writing advice videos? The money, obviously. But also, I do think there is a place within the writing world for rules, and that we can acknowledge their fallibility while also recognizing the important role rules play in our hectic little world of perpetual production of prosody. Writing is how we understand the world, from the stirring of emotions that accompany romance, to the description of a DNA string's double helix, to the treaties and pacts that define our legal and political world. Understanding writing is about understanding ourselves. To understand anything, we need to know the mechanisms through which it operates. And those mechanisms are invariably bounded, at least in part, by some kind of rules. First off, rules help make writing approachable. A large part of why this channel exists is just to get people writing, to get them over the initial fear and doubt and get them telling stories. Writing is good for the soul, and more people should have the opportunity to take part, and I believe tearing down the barriers that are preventing people from taking part is a good thing to do. I get kind of annoyed when you see people droning on and on about the muse and letting stories flow out of you, and there's no process, you just have to reach into your soul and one day the story will appear before you. That's great and all, it makes you sound really intelligent, but it doesn't tell someone how to build tension in a dialogue exchange or what they should focus on when describing their setting. Giving people a list of generally good practices that they can apply in an action-oriented way to their writing practice is, in my view at least, the best way to get beginners beyond their initial doubts and get them writing. Rules are great because they let people separate good from bad and start to understand why something works and what they should be doing to make their own writing work. Every single field, whether creative or not, is filled with a bunch of nuances and gotchas and contradictions and things that sometimes work but don't work for other reasons. Understanding the nuances and when and why to break the rules can come later. That's something for intermediate and advanced people. Part of my goal here is to give people a path to at least start writing something without being overwhelmed. Once your skill reaches a certain point, then you can start freaking out about all the logical incongruities that exist within creative writing. You know, like a serious writer does. Also, I think it's important to evaluate when breaking the rules actually works. Anytime you see a best-selling book that does things generally considered to be bad practice, you need to ask yourself, is it succeeding because of this or in spite of this? An author's popularity or the general cultural popularity of a book can overcome a lot of flaws, and it's difficult to say that if you remove those flaws, the book would still be well received. Writers, I think, sometimes lose sight of the fact that most of the people who read books treat the books they read as entirely emotional. Most readers don't break down a story to the prose level and judge it by how well the author executes on certain elements. You can certainly turn readers off with poor writing or a crummy plot, but the question of whether the flaws of the work are outweighed by the strength of the work is difficult to answer. If the book is critically acclaimed and a bestseller, then yeah, whatever strengths it has overcome the flaws. But it's still impossible to say whether those flaws are still weakening the book overall. You can say, oh, this book used adverbs and sold over 1 million copies, so the advice about adverbs is wrong. But what you should be asking is, would this book have sold 2 million copies if it didn't use adverbs? Would following the rules have actually led to a better outcome? And yes, I know that book sales aren't everything, but they are really the best proxy we have for understanding what makes writing good. In an earlier video, I talked about books that can be classified as unicorns, which are books where the popularity of the author or the timing of the book within the cultural moment is enough for it to overcome its flaws or to do things that run counter to the established rules. In these situations, the readers are willing to cut the author some slack because of the author's reputation. Take that reputation away and the book might not have been as well received. I also in that video talked about zebras, which are books that have an unusual or exotic technique or feature of some kind, but still succeed because that unusual feature just happens to work so well in that story. You can take something that doesn't normally work, but in this very specific case, it works really well. This brings us to another point about writing rules, and that is context. I don't know the book that you're writing. I don't know how what I'm telling you fits into it. Sure, usually you need a likable protagonist in your story, but maybe in your story the unlikability actually works. Maybe it points to the underlying insecurity that the protagonist has about themselves. Filter words should usually be cut, but maybe in your story they help emphasize the fact that the main character has a massive bias about how they see the world. So having prose that is more strongly biased by filtering actually helps highlight an important element of your story. Creating rules in writing is often about drawing a box around the most common cases and what generally works for the stories that people generally write. If you are an outlier, either because your skill is so good or your novel is so different, then yeah, the general advice probably isn't going to apply to you. Writing is, of course, an art form and perhaps doesn't lend itself to these sort of mechanizations, but as writers, we need these sorts of ideas in order to better understand the craft, to discuss it, and to encourage more people to take part. In this way, we can think of writing rules as sort of the foundation, the things that we can generally expect to be there when we take a step into writing prose, the things that will generally support us. We can't rely on this foundation to always support us, but most of the time we can, and when it isn't, we better have constructed some kind of flying machine so that we don't fall flat on our faces. I should perhaps have followed the rules about creating silly metaphors, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Understanding writing is about understanding ourselves, and people generally like rules. They like guidelines, they like predictability, they like to be able to know right from wrong. While rules aren't a perfect solution to this problem, they are probably the best that we're going to do, and it makes it a lot easier to come up with content for this channel. Speaking of content for this channel, this piece of content for this channel is coming to a close. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Almost sneezed there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.